And we are recording, and here I sit with the wonderful Mayet Leilani. My name is Stewart Pearce, and this is Mayet. And Mayet and I met several months ago. We're recording in 2020, in fact, in the late summer of 2020. And when we met, we had this remarkable connection on a soul level. And Mayet was really, really gracious and full of kindness, coming on to a series of dialogues that I created with remarkable female soul keepers, soul stewards. And she came on, it's called Deep Dialogues. And we liked each other so much that we decided we had to keep on talking about the wonderful interconnectivity of the way that our spirit dances together. So we become almost like one spirit. Mm. And so here we are recording a conversation today about the whole substance of mystical relationships, and of course how mystical relationships can reach into a series of very remarkable transfiguring or transcendental energies that are principally keyed or triggered by love. And that's our source code. Mm-hmm. It's wonderful to see you.
It is, it really is. And the friendship and the sharing just continues to delight, doesn't it? Yeah.
It does. It does. It does.
While you were talking, my phone popped on its screen the dictionary app's word of the day, which was kindred. And I thought, yes, here I am talking with a kindred soul. And when it comes to mystical relationships, I'd say that feeling of being kindred is so much part of what people long for. And that, I would say, I mean, of course, the root of the word means being, kin, but apart from genealogy, I would say that it really speaks to what a mystic, in fact, is, which is a person who has a light lineage and communicates light field to light field. And I think this maybe is the special sauce when people are saying, they want to find their soulmate, for instance, and terms like that, which by now have become perhaps less clear than ever. And I think it's that soul to soul, but light to light connection that is the next level of dialogue beyond things like soulmate and twin flame.
I hear you very loudly. It rings deeply in my being, in my soul. And what's also interesting coincidentally, and of course we know there is no such thing as a coincidence, but I've had principal conversations this week. We're recording in the latter week, in the last week of August 2020, where a number of key people that are coming forward to speak with me on the male soul steward series of Deep Dialogues have been expressing, I'm looking for my soul tribe. I'm looking for my tribe. I'm looking for kindred. I'm looking for kindred spirits. So it feels as though that, your narration about that is actually a very key theme around. So I relate to it on that level. But also I hear you on a very deep purpose that the definition of how many of us are yearning for connection. We're yearning for a kindred spirit. We're yearning for a soulmate or a twin flame. But actually, what we're really doing is we're yearning for the divine. Mm-hmm. And that's actually, I believe, the key of what romance really means. Mm-hmm. But I believe that what we've done is to trivialize it in many ways and sometimes weaponize it, because we've allowed our young ones to believe that romance is something that can be placed in a magazine about teen fiction, and it's all very literalized and very normalized. And actually, romance is the expression of an ideal of love that we are yearning for, that we haven't experienced for some time. And surely the ideal of love, we tend to think in a graded fashion, don't we, that go higher and higher and higher. But surely the chief ideal is that we stand before the divine and we are embraced by the divine. And that's the ultimate mystical union. That's the ultimate mystical relationship that we're looking for.
Yes.
And then
I
we meet
think,
that into other considerable relationships, because I feel that when I meet you, for example, I feel that we're meeting on this level of integrated truth through our experiences of life, our individual experiences of life, through all of the metering that we've gone through of assessing who am I? Who am I? Not what am I, but who am I? And obviously, you know, we both suffered, as humans tend to do, and then we've risen like Phoenix out of the ashes into a state of wonderful divine resolution where we begin to feel that, I'm okay with this. And when we meet it, as I meet you, I see the face of God.
yes. I think it's been daunting to consider being and having that within what we might call the normal male-female relationship. And as a woman, as I've seen it, the idea has been more attractive to women. I think women can sort of better understand how that could work. But for men, it's like, wouldn't that mean the priest was there all the time watching? But wouldn't we want to like cover ourselves with fig leaves then all the time? So that idea that became so ingrained within religion, for instance, and all of the shaming around sex and so many things we can all immediately access in our minds, has led to, in part, an attraction to the idea, but in part a sort of like, but how would it still be earthy and sexual and wonderful, you know?
Yes, and I often feel that, you know, the true mystics that I've met that are within organized mysticism, and what I mean by that is those that have actually taken open vows with either within Christianity or within the esoteric doctrine within Judaism. I've met Kabbalists who are obviously fulfilling a heritage of Kabbalism, so to speak, that they've lived in different incarnations and they've been in shul, you know, whether they be rabbi or not, that there they are reaching into rabbinical wisdom, that many of them have taken a vow of celibacy. And yet there is no denial of sexuality, there is no denial of sensuality, there is no denial of sensory, the sense
Mm-hmm.
delights that we
Mm-hmm.
may feel guilty about, and maybe he's watching. Rather, those that are really true mystics, that they take the energy of arousal and they literally find ways of being able to not subjugate, but sublimate. So they use the energy in relation to their devotion.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, for example, there was an extraordinary nun who was actually a Carmelite nun who I believe is now dead, but she had the most unbelievably successful TV program, a series, because she was an art connoisseur as well as being a nun.
Oh, I saw some of those. It was really
And
delightful.
she was the
Yeah.
most extraordinary human being.
Uh-huh. Yes. Yes, that was
And
very
whenever she met the Renaissance painters, I mean by that the Italian Renaissance, and often dealing with naked bodies, she was so fascinated by the naked bodies and was obviously so turned on, but not in a prurient way, in the way of, oh, how beautiful that this should be one of God's creations. And often the bodies were engaged either in amorous or sexual acts. And she was so overt about it. I thought
mm-hmm.
that was absolutely extraordinary. And she talked about well, of course, I've taken a vow of celibacy, but that doesn't mean to say that there's a denial of my sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
It's offering my sexuality to the divine. And then, of course, the other part of that, before I hand over to you again, is the fact that those of us that are really living these deep pathways of mysticism, but most of us have been claimed to be alone in our journeys, and that we may have had significant relationships, but that actually spirit, the divine, life circumstance have claimed us to be alone, and that in aloneness we find the all oneness
Mm-hmm.
that is our relationship with the divine.
Yes.
Until we decide to, okay, well, this is really great. Thank you very much. Now, what I'd like to do is to use all of this extraordinary information about my emotionality and about the way that I use my creative power. I would like to find out what it is living in a very intimate, significant human relationship, to see if I can actually remain centered, to see that I can remain true and not
Right.
compromise myself, and to see if I can remain absolutely loving in all of the actions of what that relationship means. And of course,
Yes.
those of us that have been in relationships, intimate sexual relationships, or indeed loving relationships, we all know that the other partner can be very testing of us.
Not that we are ever.
No,
Yes.
exactly. I know a very long-term relationship that I had, which went on for many years. I was always being accused of manipulating the situation to bring about the greatest good. And I, in all due humility and truth, I would often say, I think what you mean is that I'm engineering something. I don't feel I'm a manipulator. This is not some selfish, narcissistic gain. It's just that I feel in this particular regard that this idea is actually preferable to that idea. To embrace, I'm engineering, not manipulating. But of course, what's interesting is that that's an indication that the other was feeling insecure about the notion of the idea that it was better than his or hers. And in my case, it was his. And that what he was trying to do is to project his inefficiency or his I am not good enough onto me, and therefore I was manipulative.
Mm-hmm. Right. He would then
So we learned.
feel manipulative um, because of his basis, his view, his perspective, right? Then it would make that manipulative. We're discussing really the very real problems of bringing what we're talking about when we say divine love or the divine light, bringing that aspect into a relationship. I'm reminded that I spent a long weekend with Barbara Marks Hubbard at her home after we'd done an event together. And in the course of many cups of tea and girlfriend kind of sharing, she mentioned that within the previous couple of years, her very long-term relationship had changed considerably. And I asked, oh, are you no longer with so-and-so? And she said, no, that wasn't the change. The change was, and by this time, Barbara was in her 80s, she said, he, being 10 years younger than me, came to me and said, darling, I really still want sex. And she said to me, and of course, I'm just kind of past all that. My hormones sort of slowly declined, and I didn't ever do anything about that. And our relationship adapted to that, and we even saw opportunities and went through all of that. And now here he is, sort of changing the game. And I don't feel like I any longer have the equipment, and I suppose I could have thought of taking hormones or something like that, but that's not where we went. And we always would stay in honest dialogue. So he would, or I would say wherever we truly were. So he had said, and then that became a dialogue about, how much did it matter? And was it a deal breaker? And what will we do about that? Because it's brought into the environment that we continue to create together. And finally, I went to him and I said, I've given this great deal of thought, and I can do it if we can move into sexuality in a completely different way. And if I can really come from the divine feminine and we can bring that divine aspect in. And she said he was so daunted by that, yet he was a man of like mind, very much of like mind to her. This was not some completely foreign new agey kind of thought or anything. It was all things he believed in, and yet he was very daunted by thinking of that actually within the bedroom. It's like, church is church, and sex is sex, and they're, they don't need to be in each other's way there. And he confessed that he felt very self-conscious about that, and couldn't quite imagine it. And so they were in dialogue then about that. And he finally said, well, I really do want sex. and I'm intrigued by the idea. Frankly, I can't imagine it. I can't imagine, from how sex feels to me as a man, like, I think I'd lose my erection, he said. And so I can't, it doesn't sound very sexual, really. And won't it mean we'll lose our earthiness? And she said, I can imagine it being not that at all. I can imagine it actually being more earthy. And he said, I think then I'm going to have to follow your lead, which might be partly what my difficulty is. And in a deep male way, to feel I have to be instructed by the priestess about sex, I think that's part of what I'm having to move beyond. So let's agree then that since you can conceptualize this, that I will follow your lead until it becomes we're both leading, or whatever it becomes. And so she said, so then we began to go into this, and it became something amazing that I had never known that sex could be, and that I'd never really experienced in my life. Though as a woman, I'd sort of like wished for or imagined these kinds of things, but it was not really part of how relationships were. And so I had not brought myself to it any sooner. And she said I was so surprised to bring myself to it when all that was finished. So I think that that story really shows we may long for expressing more of the divine frequencies in any kind of relating, but there are some real practical problems with that in how we've come to think, and weird ideas about what we think that would mean or look like.
Amazing story. Amazing.
You said a moment ago, I think before we started recording, that you had expressed to someone, I have the same practical concerns or movement toward fear or whatever things as anybody else. And I think that that hits at, we don't think divinity has that, but divinity in form, in a human body, that's part of what it's all about. It's not about eradicating the form or the fears or the whatever. Certainly not about quitting to eating or pooping or sorry, people, we're sort of using all the words, aren't we? It's not about that, and yet we believe it is. We do think.
Oh, absolutely. And I remember many, many, many years ago, I was trying to access why I had a complex, and the complex was called separation anxiety. I didn't know what it was called, but it was defined by an Israeli friend of mine when I was, I was on a sacred pilgrimage in Israel, and I was leading a very significant being, and for 3 or 4 days I had this interminable sickness of weeping and lamentation. And she said, "Oh, you're experiencing separation anxiety." And suddenly, oh, it was called something, and so I had a handle on it. Oh, that's what it is. And I knew the impulse because it had been going on all my life. And so she said, the issue is that you're non-nomadic, you're a fixed sign, so you don't know how to move easily. And each movement is not ritualized. Each movement is never sacred. So you're never fully in the warm embrace of what the divine is all about. Go and live with the Bedouin. And I said, well, thanks for the deduction, but what do you mean go and live with the Bedouin? She said, no, I'm serious. I can organize it for you if you like. And so she organized it for me. And I lived with the Bedouin for nearly 4 months and lived as a Bedouin. Now, I don't mean four-wheel drives. I mean camels and goats and sheep in the
Oh,
desert, moving
wonderful.
oasis to oasis. And it was one of the most staggering experiences in my entire life because it taught me so many things. Anyway, the point of the story is that each action was dedicated to the divine.
Mm-hmm.
Pooping in the desert, there's a ritual.
Hooping?
Pooping, shitting,
Oh, pooping, yes.
because there's no lavatory, there's no WC.
So,
What do you do? Do it in the oasis? No, of course not.
mhm,
So there's a whole social system which is
mhm,
ritualized, and the sparkling. I mean, there were many, 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 many aspects of that social system, which it seems apropos the story that you were telling about Barbara and her partner, that
mhm,
he was having to actually describe. Was actually having to enter into a definition of the social systems that he took completely for granted, and yet we needed to reinvent them to find ways of dynamically moving into the essence of what the relationship was all about in the joined intention, in the co-creation of let's make love, but it has to be a sacred act. It has to
mhm,
be sacred sexuality. And, going back to the Bedouins, one of the extraordinary things was that they were so acutely aware all the time. They were so present. They spent many hours just being. The Western mind, through the lens of Western
mhm,
thought, looks and thinks, why are they being so lazy? Why are they being so idle? They're
mhm,
not doing anything. But actually, what they were doing is just being.
mhm,
So when they looked at you, there was none of this Western going on in either minds or in the space between. They would just look at you, and their eyes were so focused because of the immense inner stillness that you would feel that they were boring into your soul. So they had this ability not just to do this with human and with each element of nature, and particularly they all knew instantaneously it's time to leave.
mhm,
And sometimes it would take place in the middle of the night. It wasn't just during the day, because most of the time we didn't travel by day because it was so hot in the desert that we traveled by night. And
mhm,
I would be awoken. The eldest son, there were 16 of us, and the eldest son spoke English. Nobody else spoke English. So he was my interpreter. He was extraordinary, Muhammad.
mhm,
I've never seen him since that time, but we came so close. We would even sleep together. Because my problem was that I was freezing cold in the middle of the night. I
uh-huh.
was
Oh,
so
yeah,
cold.
right.
I thought I was going to perish. And he said, come here. So he would spoon my body so that we would
Mhm,
keep each other warm. And there was nothing sexual. It was
mhm,
completely sensual, warming. And so we became immensely close. And also, he spoke really good English. So he could show me how to look after my body, how to wash, how to, find somewhere to shit, etc., how to eat, how
and
to,
how to ritualize it. I'm
and
interested
how
in
to
that
ritualize
you
each
used that
moment.
word, that it was all ritualized.
And this was the curing, do you see, for my
Mm,
separation anxiety, because I
mm,
realized that there had been
yeah.
so many comings and goings as a child, and
Mhm,
particularly significant people, my father,
mhm,
and it was never explained. They would come, joy, leave, loss.
mhm.
There was always this
Yes.
I intuited when they were going. I wasn't given any information. They weren't packing bags. 3 days beforehand, I just knew that something
Mm.
had stirred. And so that he showed me. I mean, for example, in the middle of the night, the wind would change and everybody would know. And Stewart
Would need to be told.
would make me say, we're going. And everybody had their job.
Mhm. Ah,
So,
yes.
the ladies the women would pack up the interior of the tents into boxes onto the camels. The boys
Mhm,
would roll up the rugs onto the camels. The men
mhm,
would take the tents down onto the camels. In 10 minutes, it was all done. And they prayed all the way through the gesture.
mhm.
And then we'd be off. And then it was a question of, well, where are we going to end up? No, that's not even in their thinking. It's
That's not
just
how it happens.
the
Yeah.
journey. And they would read sun, they would read stars, or to me, one grain of sand looked like another grain of sand, but they read sand. It was
Mhm,
extraordinary. And we would always find an oasis. They knew. They knew it inside. And then when we arrived, the whole thing would happen in reverse. But each task was prayed, and then we would go into the main tent, coffee was made, and Papa, the clan chief, would say prayers to Allah, may his name be praised, for swift passage, great gratitude, gratitude, gratitude. And so I thought, oh, that's what it's all about. I need to pray my way through all of my relationships, my
Mhm.
relationship with food.
And I think you've said something key now, really important for mystical relationships, because in what Barbara shared with me, that was the way they began.
Exactly.
She said, well, then I think the first thing that we have to do um, on our get lucky night um, or moment is we have to start with a ritual.
Yes, yes.
And that uh, reclaiming of ritual in the individual life is something that I think Western society has very, very much to learn from. Having lost, often we're, like here in America, for instance, we're um, so appreciating the North American Indian and their tribes and sort of longing to be part of their tribe, and often can be adopted and so on. But more, we've lost our tribe. We don't really know our tribe, and therefore we don't know the rituals of how to be in something, and that can become uh, stifling and limiting. Those types of rituals can, of course, go to that extreme, which all of us turned away from. But bringing them back in now is part of what creates the relationships we're all missing and longing for. And in terms of our topic, I think the mystical ones, just thinking back to Barbara saying that was the first thing, was that each time they began with a ritual, a meditation, they sort of made up their own as one would need to. And that was, they did the things, starting the things like we might imagine, but gazing into one another's eyes until there was that feeling of actually perceiving the soul that was there, the soul that is neither of them, of course, and then bringing that soul in. But that is a technique that is essentially a ritual to lead two people into something new. I think that you and I may have more rituals in our life, as mystics may think about rituals more often, because it is part of the lineage of a mystic. But for the most part, it's so easy to be too busy in the day to have any ritual or to ritualize anything, and certainly not pooping. There's not time for ritualizing what might seem more likely sacred moments.
Well, it's just an irritant, isn't it? I've got to empty my body rather than, wait a minute, no, this is.
Yes, let's get rid of that and not think about it.
I know that when we were chatting initially about, well, where are we going with this extraordinary conversation? We got a title, but and one of the degrees that was so extraordinary was the fact that, and I feel it's important to bring it in this moment, is the nature of reverence, the nature of
Oh,
grace.
yes.
That
Yeah.
what is reverent about regarding our bodies with such love, with such honor, with such respect,
Mm.
that we know that from a physiological point of view, there is a call of nature, as we call it,
Mm-hmm.
and that we need to go to wherever we need to go. It may be a hole in the forest, in the ground, I mean, or it may be we go to a WC, it may be, whatever our social organizational social systems are, that we honor that. And actually,
Mm-hmm.
when we think about it, it's so basic to us all that it indicates an inherent spiritual toolkit, because most people regard pooping as a private activity, and most people regard it as being an activity where there's an opportunity for internalization.
Mm-hmm.
The difficulty is that the doing mind conspiracy takes over. So we take the newspaper to the John, or we
Mhm.
take our cell phones to the John, or the laptop to the John, and we
Right.
but it's a moment for internal reverie. That's the point. And what we're really saying, I feel, is that we need to ritualize that experience. We need to come
Mhm.
out of the anesthesia of, no, it's just another doing, and recognize this extraordinary moment of privacy. Of,
Because it's about the word you used, honoring, respect,
yeah,
uh, and it's about bringing awareness,
yes, yes,
getting in the present, as one often says, being in the present. So it's really a moment with the body. I have a body,
yes, yes.
and honoring the body and its
Yes.
needs, and not being revolted by the body and its
And,
needs.
and that was the way that I discovered sexuality. That's
Mhm.
when I discovered it, because it actually, the ha moment was in the middle of the mass. It was
Aha.
because I was fixated, because I was brought up a Christian. I was brought up a Christian within a context of Protestantism. So my
Mhm.
parents were Protestants; they weren't Catholics. But we went to a very old church all the time, and it was from an, and now I appreciate its architecture, but it was really, really, really dull, with the priests saying things like, "Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." And I was thinking, human beings don't talk like that. What are they doing at the age of 8, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 9? And then when it was a long story, but basically, when I moved into secondary education, when I moved into high school, the initial high school that I went to, I was brutalized. So I was moved away from that into another high school, which was a bit of an inconvenience for my father, but it was a saving grace for me, because the school was based on Anglo-Catholic principles. So we're still Protestant, but we celebrated the Mass twice a week as though it were Roman. So there was the theater of ritual. It
Yes,
was so
right.
beautiful. And of course, I was so fascinated by these extraordinary prayers, these wonderful vestments, all the bells and smells of Roman Catholicism
Mhm.
were enraptured within, that it became a turn on for me. I was
Mhm.
sensually, and because I had all of these at the age of 15, all of these hormones, I didn't know how to live my testosterone. I had an erection all the time. So it became part of that.
Mhm.
And then that's when I saw it. That's what I need in my life. It's not about just the physiological action of
Mhm.
becoming stimulated and then coming. It's actually about making love in this way.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
because I had that thought, immediately the human being that was to become the vessel of my love appeared in front of me.
Mhm. Ah,
And
yes.
what's interesting is that this was a very good person who
Mhm.
was older than I, and I did the seducing, but it
Mhm.
was all sacred sexuality. So each moment was ritualized.
Mhm. Right.
The point when 3 years later, so that was quite extraordinary, that I was in a committed relationship that was going to go on for the rest of my life. That's what I felt the commitment was. But I was told by my partner, this can't continue, that
Uh-huh.
what we did was to ritualize the departure of our relationship,
Mm.
which
Mm.
of course today is called conscious uncoupling.
Yes, right. That's right. It is. Yeah.
But what's interesting in all of this, it seems that there's an adherent, there's as it were, cosmic goo that is drawing us, on a very pleasant level, which is that in this space, there is the expression of grace,
Mhm.
which inherently has respect for other, even if they are being naughty or challenging in some way, that there's a respect for who they are in essence. And therefore we move into that space of reverence and grace, which is the cosmic goo that keeps it all moving, because essentially it's all based on love.
Yes.
I,
And
if I may just add one last thought before I
yes.
want to hand over to you. And therefore, I am desirous of each of us, even in our casual relationships, to bring in reverence. meaning that we formulate a physical action, a physical behavior that is about honoring other. And of course, the fun one that we're using at the moment is namaste,
Mm-hmm.
which of course means, hi, the God within me sees the God within you, and it's wonderful for us to play. So we're already there, we're conscious with that. Now, I try doing this everywhere, even when I go and, several times a week, I love to go to the coffee shop and get a coconut latte. Anytime I drink coffee, and it's just so delicious. They all know that I go in and I always, no matter how I've got crowds of people behind me, so they always bow to me. And then they say, we know what you want. You see, isn't that interesting? That in that space of reverence, they know, okay, you could say, well, that's just repetitive behaviors. They know I'm going to say, could I have a coconut latte, please? Actually, they know we know what you want because we're already in a space of grace. So we can intuitively read. What
And
comes
that
with it is about,
reverence, that idea of bringing in reverence. We all know that amongst Indigenous people, they find our questions about what is sacred. Is that mountain sacred? Is this the sacred tree? They often find this perplexing, and we're trying to find their, in a way, religion, their belief system about spirituality. And again, I have seen amongst vastly different types of Indigenous peoples, they don't have this. It's all sacred. It's all sacred. Nothing is, in fact, more sacred, unless we've had more time with ritual there. So, we liked this place on the mountain and we started going there a lot, and it became our sacred mountain. So it became sacred to us, but not because it was in itself somehow more sacred than something else. So they have this understanding very clearly in their lives. And that is, they honor the sacredness in everything. And they express gratitude to it, all sorts of ways of honoring that is sacred, generously provided, and so forth. And I think I've said to you before, when it comes to loving ourselves, we're trying so hard to get self-esteem, but it's not something to get that we lack because of something that happened in our childhood, which may in fact have given us problems liking ourselves. But the way to gain that is to honor oneself, it's through the act of honoring oneself. So I like to flip that around, esteem yourself. And what you've just been talking about is esteeming the other. And so I think in a mystical relationship, then the idea of esteeming one another must be part of what we're longing, so deeply longing for, is to be esteemed and to have another to esteem. And difficulties certainly arise the moment we step off of that path of esteeming ourselves and esteeming the other. And so there are acts of honoring, and those are called rituals. And I just wanted to break that down for those who are listening, because ritual seems like, so what would that be exactly? Do I have to wave incense before I have sex, or what does that mean? It's to be honoring, which is in itself an attitude. And so it can be to offer a gift or to offer words, but also it's just an honoring presence, an honoring way of presenting, isn't it?
yes, it's bringing oneself back into the present of the holy instant.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that that's really what rituals are, that it's not about learning a certain behavior. When we look into rituals that are formulated within organized religion,
Mm-hmm.
it's learning a certain patter, making sure the right prayers are said. It's not about that. What
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about is
Yes, an
it's
important
about
point.
It is about repetitive behaviors, because repetitive behaviors are always securing. They're always safe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They bring us back to the vital essence of who am I in this moment, rather than what am I trying to become. I am enough in this moment. And so I feel that therefore the degree of really coming into the presentness of what is my body feeling in this moment, because feeling is the language of the soul. I need to honor this moment of what I'm feeling, rather than what am I feeling? I mean, most people say, I don't know. You tell me what, it's, no, what are you feeling? So many people, when they come to me, they begin the soul reading with telling me what other psychics have told them about themselves. So of course I honor that, because there's purpose in that on some level. I try and perceive what the purpose is, and generally speaking, it's to do with the fact that they're just space filling rather than revealing something very genuine. And then once that is passed, I always say, now tell me who you feel you are, because that's all received information. I'm really not interested if you were Nefertiti in a past lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm really much more interested in is, did you scrub floors?
Mm-hmm.
The balance in the extraordinary and the ordinary, because
Yes.
I'm so inflated by the extraordinary, so that we come back into the present moment and really feel, what is my relationship with the divine? What is my relationship with the mystery of life, with the honoring and the awing and the wonder of transcendence? Because effectively that's what we're trying to refined, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
All of this is within, as we know. We're born with this spiritual toolkit. It's just that the conditioning experience of our lives and the way we're socialized and educated is that we forget about it.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're saying, earlier this morning, when I was just preparing to come and see you, and to have this wonderful conversation, I was listening to Oprah. And Oprah was sharing that extraordinary gift or ritual or rite or prayer, which is a gratitude. Do we, at the end of the day, think about, well, now what am I grateful for in my life? Or do we just simply take a sleeping pill or have another glass of wine or whatever it is, or a hot cocoa or whatever, and just fall asleep? Do we really honor, do we revere what the day has been about? Even if it has been challenging, what has it taught us and what are we grateful for? Which I feel is really beautiful. Finalizing. We talk a lot about beginning something, revering someone through a bow, through a namaste. Are we, for example, sitting when we sit down together, or when we sit down to ourselves to eat, are we saying grace? That's the ritual that we're really talking about. That there's that level of mindfulness that brings us right into the body.
And it's bringing then our consciousness, becoming conscious, and not mindless or unconscious, being awake. And that's the practice, if you will, that we're all involved in, is this wonderful opportunity to bring the consciousness that we really are, this extraordinary consciousness that we are, into more activities and more moments of our life, increasingly more and more seamlessly, and doing that while we're in a human suit,
Yes.
which is so messy and inconsistent. And so it's not something to keep falling short of. It's really like the journey. It's like the Bedouins might have said to you, where are we going? No, now it's the journey. That there was like the tent and whatever that might be called. Now it's the journey. So we are journeying, and journeying as adventurers, discovering how in form, with all of its challenges and conundrums, to live this consciousness that we are. It's journeying that, not trying to arrive at it. And then that's where the fun of it is. And that's where the joy of it is to keep journeying it. It's really icky when we're trying to arrive at it and just always falling short. You know, the perfection of that might be when we're dead, you know, might be when there's not form. But why did we take form? Not just so that we could realize that and then get the heck out of this form. No, you know, no, not for that. To journey it into form and to see what that means and what that might look like and how that might relate to others, because that consciousness is sort of formless, right? It's often called the great formlessness. And it's often said, especially in Eastern philosophies, that there isn't form, all form is illusion. And there's even then sort of the extrapolation that therefore undesirable form, and that desires are undesirable and so on. But really, you know, come on, we came into a form for some reason, for the joy of it, for the opportunity of it, not just to realize it's a bad thing and can't wait till we're out of here, or to sit in a cave with it, you know, once we realize, then to stay out of form as much as possible. No, that can't be it. That just defies any sense of deep understanding. To be truly in a mystical relationship is to say, all right, I agree. I put up my hand and I agree to take on, you know, with some sense of enjoyment and real adventure, this ability to express consciousness in the messiness of form, in the imperfection, to wed those and see what that means. And it doesn't, I don't think, it means the obliteration of one at the expense of the other.
No, that I mean, I completely concur. You know, there are many thoughts and feelings are moving through me. You trigger as you go many responses inside me, and to bring them all together in some form of synthesis. My exploration in life for these last nearly now 70 years has been about the Renaissance mind, because it's an opportunity in civilized history, in our civilizations, whether this be organized or indigenous, where huge change takes place. And normally the change is augmented or initiated by cosmic cycles changing or by natural cycles changing, just as this is now. And one of those periods of great change in our history, because history is interesting, isn't it? We can look back and see patterns of behavior that can help us perhaps read where we are now, or where we might read where we would like to be in the future, because right now is pretty ugly, but I would like to create great beauty in the future. And one of them is the Elizabethan Renaissance. And as we know, words just flowed onto that stage of life through the arousal of literacy, meaning that words were being printed. They were printed slightly earlier on in 1465 by John Caxton, you know, with his printing press. But the noble people were the only people who read. And the ordinary people, so to speak, and we're only talking about 1/5 of the population and the noble people, they could read. And they could probably also read Latin and Greek, as well as whatever the English was that they were reading. But everybody else couldn't read. Now, if you don't read, you hear words in a completely different way. However, so Mr. Shakespeare came along, you know, and there's a huge subject in itself. And one of the people that he created holds what one of the greatest ideals of that time was in a series of wonderful phrases, which I'd like to speak. And I'm going to sort of annotate it slightly, because it's largely talking about man, and I'm going to say man, woman.
Mm-hmm.
It says, what a piece of work is a man. I feel today we say, what a piece of work is a man and a woman. How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form and moving, how express and admirable. In action, how like an angel. In apprehension, how like a god, the beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. Now that, the words may be a little bit strange to us both, or to
Oh,
others.
it's so wonderful.
So I can interpret very gently when it says, how noble in reason. Now, for them, being noble in mind meant that we had higher minded principles. So the noble people were often the custodians of those principles, of those ideals, and they didn't talk down to their servants. There was something called beneficent patrimony, where they looked after their servants with as much grace as their own lives. It was called grace and favor. And that was the system that I was brought up in, that my parents were royal servants, or my dad was a royal servant, and we were brought up in grace and favor. But the royals were the royals, and we were the ordinary people, but there was this blending of reverence.
Mm-hmm.
So how noble in reason means that we have high thoughts. How noble in reason, in how infinite in faculties, meaning that we're aware, our faculties are our senses, that we're able to actually see everything, feel everything, hear everything, smell, taste everything, because they're at the very edge of our consciousness through which we perceive everything. We filter all our beliefs, all our attitudes, all our likes, all our dislikes through them. In how infinite in faculty, in form and moving, how express and admirable. Is each action beautiful? Is each action gracious? Even if it is wiping our bottoms, or meeting somebody, is it gracious? Is it mindful? How in form and moving, how express and admirable, in action, how like an angel. That everything that they did was angelic, meaning, no, humans are humans and angels are angels. But why can't humans become like angels? Meaning that angels are omniscient, ubiquitous, so they see everything, they feel everything, they are everywhere at once, but they're always loving.
Mm-hmm.
Angels love for the sake of love. Human beings love for the sake of being loved. In apprehension, how like a god. Wow. Now, apprehension to them was again finer feeling. Comprehension was thinking, but apprehension was feeling. And it's interesting, today we've annotated that word and we talk about apprehending somebody, which is apprehending a criminal. We've changed it completely. Whereas for them, it was about the inner sensing of the universe. A reflection of God, the paragon of animals that speaks for itself. So really what we're trying to do, I feel, is to awaken within us, and with all those people who hopefully will listen into our conversation, these divine precepts that are our spiritual toolkit, that are completely inherent to us, because nothing have I said that we disagree with. It's all, that's what we are, human beings. And so we're ritualizing the whole substance of the mysticism, which is really the higher principle, the higher ideal of our relationship with the divine, and drawing all of those energies into the sanctity of each moment, and therefore into each action. It's really, really do. I mean, when things are going well between us, but what happens when the fur flies?
Yes. Yes. And that's, I would say, as we come closer to the end of our time today, let's get messy. If we're talking about mystical relationships and all of those longed for things that would mean to us when we say soulmate and twin flame, and we're talking about union with spirit brought into relationship. We're wanting a companion for that. And so I would say then, understanding that deep longing in us and what we're longing for, let's get messy. Let's roll up our sleeves and get messy together, as opposed to let's light a candle and say Om forever, and forget about life, forget about screaming babies, dirty diapers, and all the things that come with. No, let's be human, pioneering, expressing, be in that human thing, so that there will be the amazing moments when we've done it, and then the crashing falls on our head when we're so far from it. And let's have both. Let's know that's what we mean. Not, oh no, why did we lose this wonderful thing that we are meant to keep forever, forever. No, we're meant to be human and be messy and be doing it, being it, and seeing what on earth does that mean and how far we can go with it, but not as an I, you know, the longing is like the North Star that shows the path. It's not the end that we're never getting to because we so fall short all the time. It's not that. It's journey with it.
I was reminded of an action that took place in my life a few years ago with a godson, whose mother is a soul sister and is a single parent. And so she's asked me if I would be both psychically, mentally, spiritually, and physically as custodial of his growing as possible. The brunt of the responsibility lies on her shoulders, of course, which is what the uniqueness of the incarnation is all about, that they would choose one another, but there wouldn't be a father. However, so I step in whenever the surrogacy can happen. And of course, I have a very, very busy life and I'm always on the road. Geographically, it means I'm somewhere in the world. So it's an interesting relationship to keep consistent and to keep ritualizing mindfulness. However, there's this part of this is the story I'm going to tell. That the crisis took place because Clarence died. This is an 8-year-old boy, and Clarence is the cat. Clarence is the Siamese. So there's a big drama because Clarence has died, and little one is being introduced to sorrow, loss, grieving, etc., etc. And of course, we all know that's shitty. It's not nice to go through. It's jagged. It has barbed wire in it. It's ugly, and it's sometimes we drop into pools of water that are really, really, really deep, and we can hardly breathe. You know, it's a really painful experience. However, so it happened 2 days before my arrival back. And as soon as I came back from my journey, I went and saw this little boy and mama, and here he is, as soon as he saw me. So I said, okay, so come here. And I said, what do you want me to do? And he said, can you pick me up? So I said, okay, darling. So I picked him up and he's here. This is 7 years of age. He's here, weeping, weeping, weeping. And I said, okay, tell me what's going on. What are you feeling? He said, Clarence has died. And I said, okay, darling. So now that's one perception, but there's another perception. And he suddenly became really silent. What's that? Whispering into my ear. So I said, well, the other perception is that Clarence has gone to heaven. He hasn't left us. He's still here. It's just his body is not here. He's gone to heaven. And you know why he's gone to heaven? I think that's a really good thought, said this little one. So I said, he's gone to heaven because Clarence was such a good friend to us. He always gave us love. He always received love. He was always funny. We always had great stories with him. And look how we played with him. And he was such an amazing friend. But now he's gone on another journey. Okay, you can now put me down, says this 7-year-old. I put him down. And he's standing in front of me and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, he's so beautiful. Now what's going to come out of his mouth? You know, out of the mouths of babes, sucklings. And this child really quickens each moment and says something unusual. And he looked at me and he was slightly soft focused, you know, almost as though he was dazed. And he said, Stuart, I think you're God. And I said, oh, that's nice. Why is that? He said, because I'm looking at you and I can see light shimmering from your body. And you know why I know you're God, don't you? And I said, no, darling, why? And he said, because I'm also God. Because I can see light shimmering. I mean, I could go on, but I won't. I mean, it says it all, doesn't it? You know, that the tragedy of life is honored. And we say our prayers to Clarence, and we grieve, and we experience loss, and we honor loss. But then there's also the transcendental. And it seems to me that when we move into the mindfulness of the rituals of our mystical unions, our mystical relationships, that they can be just gentle thoughts. You know, for example, when a partner comes home from work and you say, so how how was your day? And they go into this whole story that we just, whatever we're doing, we just simply say, okay, so how does it feel? And they say, actually, it feels awful. Okay, so firstly, I want to tell you how much I love you. And part of that is an overture to saying, you're so wise that this is shitty, but I know you're going to get through this, and you're going to get through it with flying colors. Because actually, when I look back, you've always done that, and you've learned so much by the mistake or the failure or the drama, because you're wonderful.
There.
The true honoring of love, the true
Yes.
honor of love. And therefore, I anticipate, I don't demand, but I anticipate in all of my significant others that they do that. And when I say significant others, I'm not just talking about lovers, I'm talking about my intimates. I anticipate that they do that, you know. So I demand it, delete. I ask of it, you know. For example,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm telling a dear one about a problem that I got or a challenge, and I'm trying to wade my way through the difficult waters, and they start to fix it, I say, would you please be still? I haven't
Mm-hmm.
finished. I want to get this all out. And then when I've got it all out, I would really love you to respond. But I don't need you to fade it or fix it or hide it. I'm
Mm-hmm.
just really asking you to hold this space for me. Or when we've achieved something and we're really, really happy, how often do our friends say, well done?
Mm-hmm. Yes. That's the essence of honoring and ritual right there. You know, it's that's the core of it, really. To honor it, it doesn't mean you have to have solution or wisdom or anything profound, but to honor another, you know, truly such an antidote for the world,
Mm,
just to say really well done,
mm, mm.
or, you know, I affirm that you're such a wonderful person, or whatever.
I
Doesn't
was
need to be more lofty than that.
there's one other degree which I feel we possibly need to mention before we close our conversation for today, and that is that I feel many people might be asking, how do you know this? What is the knowing? And I guess what we're really talking about is we're opening up our intuition, our inner teacher, so that we know. And I was thinking, well, what is that? You know, as one does. Intuition is the superhighway where the angels move. And I came up with this phrase: intuition is when you don't know how you know, but somehow you know, yet you knew, and that is all you really need to know.
Journey.
It's isn't it?
Yes,
And
because the
it's
journey itself is knowing,
just
which
and
is our
how
great.
because people are always saying to me, how do you know that? You know, me not how did you acquire that information, but how do you know? You know, if somebody comes and you have an immediate intuitive reading of a certain, how did you know that? Because it's obvious they're celebrating the truth of the
Mhm.
situation, the truth of that moment, that instant, that holy instant. How does one know? Well, I believe it's to do with the fact that we're really ritualizing the mystical relationship that we have with ourselves. And within that, there is always the degree of stillness and observation. And so we're given the time in that fabric to feel deeply that substance of, I just know I love you. I just know.
And
I
that
also know that
knowing
you're
that
being really stupid in this moment, you know, whatever the observation is. And I want to help you understand why you're being stupid, which is not a condemnation. It's like, was that the highest choice? Was that the highest choice, or was that the lowest choice? What's appropriate and what's inappropriate? What's accurate and what's inaccurate? Wrong, what's right and wrong, and what's good or bad? So everything is okay. It's just, let's measure it.
to
What's the
know what we long for is is what gives us how we'll know. So if the Bedouins find themselves in movement, and the question isn't where are we going, it's now we journey. And how will you know when you arrive where you need to? Because we will find ourselves stopping. But how will you know that? That's the one who must, it's like how to be guided by. What is the thing that will let me know? That's having lost the ease with now we are journeying there to where we are going. And
Yes.
we'll know it when we are there.
Yes. I'm reminded of this story, and I guess we need to reach a point of completion, don't we, for today? The beautiful painted arrow told me, which was that it was handed down through his peoples from the lineage where this would have been experienced, meaning that when the white settlers and the white authorities were beginning to rape the land of the native peoples, and of course most of us know about that in the sense of not the historical feature of that happened, but of the way that the white peoples had lost the sense of value and celebration and believed that that land is mine, whereas the Native American people were saying, well, nobody owns the land owns itself. However, they were being socially organized into, no, you have to go and live in that reservation over there. And sometimes they would travel, not by horse, but by iron horse across the prairies by the great steam engines. And then they would arrive, but they would actually sit in the station on the floor or the stopping point. They would sit, and sometimes they'd sit there for days. And the whites were saying, what is your problem? And they would say, we're waiting until our souls catch up.
Mm-hmm.
Which is that honoring of
Yeah,
absolute.
of journey. Yeah. Journey.
So,
Yeah.
as usual, this has been an extraordinary
Yes. So
oh,
fun to
oh,
arrange.
and I really thank you. I really honor you for this wonderful,
And
wonderful.
we're going to do it again.
And so, for those of you who are listening, Mahu, Lily, and I have decided that we're going to offer 3 conversations, and this is the first. And the next conversation will be something for you to look forward to, which is all about the cosmology of relationships and how we can really understand what the true intention of feeling is all about from a cosmic point of view, so that we can again download that information from the software of the source into the hardware of our bodies and know what to do with fear, know what to do with loss without stopping the energies of just understanding how we can live the cosmology of feeling, because feeling is the language of the soul. So
Yeah.
we
On a very practical level, these are things that we all like to hear as much as we can about how
yeah,
others are
exactly.
managing, what we've learned about it, because it's something that we have a great deal of need for throughout every single day. And as a ceremonialist myself, I look forward to talking about the ceremonial aspects of moving through those things as well. And I'm sure that you have that perspective too. But it's quite a nitty gritty topic when we move into those types of feelings and patterns. It's about really being human in it. Mm.
Namaste.
Namaste.